Welcome to Forests, Folklore, and Fantasy. My name is Kelly, but I write and publish under my initials, K.M. Rice. Thank you so very much for joining me from wherever you happen to be as you're listening to this. I want you to know how much I appreciate you and, of course, that you are most welcome here. Today, we are going to talk about a subject that has more or less plagued me my entire adult life. In fact, most of my recollected teenage years as well. And I'm no sage. I don't have all the answers or possibly even any answers, but I would like to share with you what I have learned or where I am currently at in my grapple with how to live one's life and the presence of or lack of success. This is something fairly personal to me, and one message I keep learning again and again, no matter how old I am, is that if it's personal to me, there's probably a lot of other people who are also going through the same thing or potentially struggling to articulate the same thing. It's like that old adage that you hopefully were exposed to in the classroom, which is ask the question. If you have a question, there are likely several other people in the classroom who have the same question and are too shy to ask. So I was always a big question asker in school. And I hope that the contents of this episode help you on your journey in some way. And it will also include a bit of my writing that is actually going to be taken straight out of my journal. It was written as a self-help exercise for me, just not prompted by anyone, prompted by myself. I suppose I'm someone, but not meant to be poetic or necessarily shared publicly in any way. But I felt like I got so many insights out of it that I figured, why not include it in case the same holds true for you. A little bit of background about me. I am one of 4 children. I'm not the oldest. However, I am the eldest daughter. Certain responsibilities come with that territory, as many older daughters can attest to, in terms of looking after my younger siblings and feeling the need to be responsible from a young age because I was noticeably older than my younger siblings. I'm 5 years older than my younger brother and almost 8, or maybe just over 8 years older than my youngest sibling, my little sister, who those of you who watch Happy Hobbit will know as Feely in Happy Hobbit. So I can remember their childhoods. I can remember their babyhoods. I can remember when my mom was pregnant with that much of an age gap. So being somewhat cognizant and conscious and aware during those time periods probably also instilled in me a sense of guardianship over my younger siblings. And that likely has an influence in the route that my personality took. I did hear somewhere, it was on a TED Talk. I am not going to be able to name the speaker. I did hear somewhere, though, that they now believe that each child has up to, or maybe more than, 400, the number was 400, predetermined personality traits at birth. just based on our genetics. I found that fascinating because, of course, it brings into the whole equation the concept of nature versus nurture, but I won't digress any further down that rabbit hole. Just wanted to provide some background on what my young childhood was like, because it may or may not surprise you, depending on what kind of impression I've given, to learn that throughout high school and indeed junior high, I was a straight A student. I'm pretty sure I can say that with certainty. Yes, I'm pretty sure. Like, there may have been like a B plus in there somewhere, but I can remember a moment in school in sixth grade when my sixth grade teacher, so I was probably 11 or maybe 12, sat down and discussed my grade with me, like my overall grade, not just on a project, and explained to me why I was getting the grade and what she wanted me to improve. And it was the first time that it occurred to me that this wasn't just an arbitrary assessment, that I actually had an influence on it. And once that light bulb went off, I realized, oh, that's how you learn. It's not a passive action. It is an action. It's an active action. You get what you give. You don't just sit at your desk drawing like I did my entire life and would still do, because that actually helps me focus and listen, and have it magically absorbed into your mind. You actually have to engage with it in some way. You have to be pondering it as the teacher's talking, or you have to practice it. And from that moment onward, I did very well academically. In fact, that GPA got me an invitation at the university I ended up choosing to join a humanities honors program, something I can't recommend enough. It was a 2-year-long program where we began with the earliest known representation of humanity through art, also known as cave paintings, through, I believe we went through the 60s. And it covered most of my general ed, which was an amazing experience. And why I recommend it so highly is I was getting art history, literature, philosophy, regular history, writing, so English, all of that cohesively, moving through time in Europe. And I should say it was based on European history and some of the Americas. Rather than taking a bit of Plato here and the art of China there and writings from the Renaissance here, and not really being able to see the cultural conversation that was happening over the centuries. So I do feel like I was very lucky and blessed to have that opportunity. And again, for the third time, I suppose, cannot recommend it highly enough. But it also was a program in which you had to have a 3.5 GPA or higher. And if your GPA went below that, you could no longer participate in the program. So back in the old days when I did it, I thought of me and my group of friends as the nerds of the nerds. But the reason I'm bringing up some of my educational background and the achievements that I accomplished while in school, and also my position in the birth order and some of the responsibilities I took on as a young person, is because I feel like I quite tidily fit into this archetypal mold that we can just call the good girl. I feel like I fit into the mold of a good girl in terms of I learned quite young what was expected of me and what is expected of, I should say less of me, what is expected of good girls. And I wanted to be a good girl. I didn't want to be a troublemaker. I didn't want to make things more difficult for the people around me. I didn't want to get in trouble at school. I wanted to make my family proud, my parents proud, my teachers proud. I looked to them for that validation, and I figured out how to achieve it. And I just went for it. Just so you know, this isn't going to be like some dark and tragic tale where I say I lost my identity along the way. I don't think that that's necessarily true, because I still am very academically inclined. I still really have a passion for learning and a love of learning. I don't think I would be looking back at the humanities honors program that I was in with as much love and fondness in my heart if I felt like it was something I was only doing just to get the grade. But I was also around other young people, in particular in high school, who were just trying to fit the mold to please people in their lives. I remember this moment. I was a junior or a senior, and we had been reading, I don't know, a Russian novel or something, and we're taking a test. And to back up, I should say this was an AP class, as in an advanced placement class. I almost had a schedule full of those, but this is, again, going to sound like I was wise beyond my years, and maybe I was at the time, but I chose not to, even though that was recommended for me. I chose a handful of AP courses, but the reason I didn't want to be in only advanced placement courses as a 16, 17, eventually 18-year-old was because I knew the other kids on that track, and I didn't want them to be the only people I was around, because I had realized that some of the most insightful moments that I had had amongst my peers were when I was partnered up, probably in retrospect, with boys who were considered in trouble, with the kids who the teachers were worried needed some extra help, weren't performing as well, and wanted to stick them with a kid who was doing better. In my age group, back in my day, they were the skaters. They were the skaters and the pot smokers. A lot of people surfed, so I can't really lump the surfers into a particular category. But a lot of the skater boys, I learned so much from those kids by having to do group projects with them that just opened my eyes to the wider world. For example, I was doing a group project with one of these skater boys, and he hadn't done his portion, and I just felt like, no surprise. I'm always stuck doing everything, every group project I've ever done. And I asked him, well, I gave you the easiest part. I asked you to just draw the pictures or whatever it was. Whatever it was, it involved colored pencils. And he said, well, I couldn't do it because I don't have any. And to me, that was, how could you not have art supplies? I grew up in a house full of crayons. How can you not have art supplies lying around? And I was like, well, why didn't you get any? And he said, well, I asked my mom if she could get some, but she keeps getting home late from work and she hasn't had time. And then she just said she couldn't get any. And in my sheltered, comfortable upbringing, that blew my mind. That this kid who, in my mind, I just saw as lazy or just didn't want to do the work, was going home alone for the entire afternoon until his mom, who may have been a single mother, I don't know, was able to come home from work. And something like getting a box of colored pencils for a school project was just not a priority. And then we got to talking, and I found out more about who he was and what his life was like. And I don't recall all the details right now, but that moment always stuck with me because I learned more from that kid and that interaction than I knew I ever would from the other kids who were in advanced placement. Probably because we probably all came from similarly somewhat privileged backgrounds. I don't come from a wealthy area, but I was certainly more privileged than the skater boy. And I realized that if I got shoehorned or self-selected to be in a track only with those kids who were really desperate to get good grades to get into good colleges, I would lose those eye-opening moments and experiences. So I opted not to. But to get back to the story I was initially attempting to tell about being in English class as a junior or senior and having done this exam, one of these young men in this, I guess, AP class, it was either an AP class or I knew he was one of the kids who took all the AP courses that he could. He wanted to go over the results with me. And so I sat there helping him go through the results. And he said, well, okay, now I get why I got this question wrong. I get why I got that question wrong. How on earth did you know the answer to this question? And it was a literary based question. And I'd understood the allusion or metaphor, whatever it was in the novel. And I explained, or I told him the answer. And as he was writing it down on his paper to know for the final, I started to unpack it for him. And he waved his hand and brushed me off and said, I don't care. I don't want to know why. I'm not here to learn. I'm here to ace this test. I'm here to get an A. And I kind of remember at that moment being like, yeah, this is why I'm not doing a bunch of AP classes with other kids like you. Like what's the point? But I feel like those kids were a premonition of what I could have been had I really bought into the whole good girl myth. And I'm glad I didn't go that far into it. And that's part of why I don't feel like it took anything from me necessarily. But I do think that performing to other people's expectations and reaching for these very structured, tangible measures of success set me and many other people up for unrealistic understandings of how the rest of the world and therefore life functions. I apologize. I didn't think that laying that background would lead me to sharing so much, but I hope some of you can relate, because I should have prefaced it by saying maybe it was obvious that I went to a public school, and what public schools and probably most private schools do is, I shouldn't say that this is their goal. I think their goal is education, but a byproduct of the way that education is delivered and how it is structured and how your day is structured is a form of institutionalization. And this isn't like fringe. This is coming from how our public school system in the United States was developed and how it came about during the Industrial Revolution, and how for example, like the ringing of the bell signified a shift change at the factory, and that they were educating people to have a certain level of knowledge to be able to go fulfill those jobs and to already be accustomed to that environment. So I have to give myself and everyone else some grace over the faulty thinking once we leave that system, once we leave that environment of continuing to search for those external markers, those rules, those guardrails, those guides to tell us how to be successful, how to achieve. We go from a world full of external validation and evaluation into the wilds. And if you end up getting a job where there's a clear corporate structure, then you can learn the ropes and you can do your best to succeed. It doesn't mean you'll always be rewarded for it, but there is some structure there. But for those of us like me who decided to take a different path, though decide using that verb indicates that I had some autonomy in it. I do feel like writing chose me. I didn't choose writing. Those of us in the creative fields and many other freelance fields have a much less structured work environment, workday, schedule, and we don't really have the external parameters that measure success in the way that we did in school or that more traditional fields of work may have. That said, there is an external marker that everyone can point to that is very much socially condoned and in fact encouraged by our culture, and that is financial gain. We live in a society that equates wealth and financial gain to success or with success. So if you are working in a less traditional field, the amount of money you're making is an easy way to take stock of how well you're doing at work. And it's a somewhat natural extension then to think that that monetary value has something to say over the quality of you as an individual and over if you are doing life right. Spoiler alert, there is no way to do life right or wrong. All there is growth and learning and change. Life is experiences and joy and sadness and grief and euphoria. Life is this incredibly chaotic, uncontrollable, surging, breathing thing that we cannot put many quantifiable or measurable parameters on. And yet, because so many of us grew up in this quasi-institutionalized form of education and in a society that condones and in fact encourages and applauds those who have achieved these external markers of success, it's very easy in our minds to fall into this way of thinking that we just aren't good enough, that we're making too many mistakes, that we're not doing things right. If I were doing things right, I would have what so-and-so has. I would be doing what so-and-so's doing. Comparison. Today's society not only encourages comparison, especially through the venue of social media, it invites comparison. And I don't know who to attribute this quote to, but comparison is the thief of joy is one of my mantras. I did not write that. I read it at some point somewhere. But also consumerism. Social media and our culture at large in the United States of America is a consumerist machine. We do live in a consumer-driven economy. But the pace that we are shown ads is unprecedented in human history. And because of social media that, again, encourages comparison, it is also encouraging insecurity. If they're not using humor, marketing and ads are trying to make you feel as if you lack in some way, are inadequate in some way. You're too skinny, you're too fat, you're too old, you're too young, you're not in shape enough. If you are in shape, You probably should be getting even more in shape. I could go on, but I don't really want to nitpick every detail of marketing. I'm not really equipped to do that, but I do know that the emotion that most advertisers are attempting to make you feel is insecurity, because if you are insecure, you're more likely to turn to someone who has an answer, someone who will take this insecurity away, and they want you to feel that that's a product, which again drives the consumerism. So you can't really ever say that it's faulty thinking to go around the place feeling inadequate. It's actually an incredibly normal response given the environment most of us are in and the media that we're consuming or that's being pushed at us. It's fairly inescapable. So if you feel inadequate in any way, I'm not saying to deny that feeling completely, because discomfort is the beginning of growth, right? There may be a valid reason for that, but if there isn't a valid reason for that, ask yourself where that thought came from, where those voices in your head came from that decided to tell you you're not thin enough. Using that just as an example, if you don't have a problem with your mobility, if you want to be healthier and you want to exercise for the multitude of benefits that exercise can bestow upon you, if you want to feel more comfortable with your level of strength or athleticism, if you have a health issue and a medical professional has told you that you really should try to burn some more fat, that's different. Those are different motivators than flipping through a magazine and seeing airbrushed, photoshopped models and feeling as if you're inadequate because look how perfect this fake human being is. So in that sense, feeling inadequate is a completely rational, normal response to our society. But I don't want to just blanketly say that if you feel inadequate, it's never your fault. But I do encourage you to question where the messaging is coming from. And if the person or company giving you that message has something to gain by you feeling less than. Because if you aren't careful, you can find that you can go many years, if not decades, with these false beliefs in your head that accumulate and over time can very negatively affect your well-being and your sense of self. And that's what I'm going to talk about next, because that's the issue I have often struggled with, and I think most of us struggle with it as well. I will open by being, for me, very vulnerable. I know I was in my previous episode too, that old rage where I shared some of my very personal journey as a woman trying to make her way through this mad world. And I'm going to say that I don't ever walk around feeling successful. I don't feel like I have been a successful person in many different aspects of my life. And I was asked a question by a therapist, and she asked me, if you remove money, if you remove finances, what does success look like to you? And I really had to think about that, because I had to deconstruct this very capitalist notion that our success and our value and our worth are somehow tied to our bank accounts or to what we can bring in. And even though I would freely give that advice to other people, I had a friend who's an actor, and he was doing a signing at a convention and said something about how he did that day. And he said, well, you kind of scoff at the amount I made. And I said, oh, just so long as you never tie it to your identity or your worth. And it just came from me so freely, like it just came out of me. But I can't follow that advice for myself, in part because I'm not someone who would ever be hired to go to a convention and paid to sign things for people. But also because sometimes it's so easy to impart this type of advice or wisdom or these truths and feel like they apply to everyone else, but do they apply to me? Why am I so different? I realize I've always put myself in a different category than everyone else, and I've often viewed myself as some sort of failure for not having what I think I should have. And I don't mean physically, I don't mean physical items. I mean markers of status and success, even though my mind is at war saying, yeah, but do you even value those things? For example, like I said in one of my previous episodes, Rethinking Nature, I put more value in a potato than I do in a dollar bill, because what am I going to do in what I consider to be the real world with this piece of paper infused with cotton or whatever the heck it is that makes our Tinder in the US? What am I going to do with that? Can I use it for Tinder? I mean, who decided that it has that value? It's a cultural collective thing, right? We all just agreed that it has a certain value. And now in the digital age, it's gotten even weirder. You don't even have these George Washingtons and these Benjamin Franklins. You have numbers that are telling you very important information. And I'm not trying to discredit money. I'm not trying to discredit our economy. I'm simply saying that philosophically, I don't understand it. I know that at one point, we actually had piles of silver in vaults that backed up our money. But even then, everyone says, well, back then it was worth something. I'm like, was it? I mean, what can you do with silver? Like, what makes silver so great? What makes gold so great? This is a conversation I've often had to have with my partner, because in his culture, he believes that you show great affection through a grand gesture, such as nice jewelry. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm not really into it. And we've had to have these conversations where sometimes our cultures collide and sometimes the gender norms of our societies collide. And I'm like, yeah, I know I'm female. It doesn't mean I inherently like everything shiny or that I like diamonds. Like, do you know what a diamond is? Do you know how they're dug out of the ground? I mean, I still say, give me a potato. I guess I'm one of the cheapest dates ever, because also one of my favorite foods is spaghetti. But I don't necessarily have the same value system as a lot of people in our society. And in fact, I question that they actually have that value system. I think a lot of people just haven't ever had the time to stop and think about it, or have never challenged themselves to stop and think about it and to think, do I actually place value in these luxury items? Or am I just engaging with their perceived value? And the same can be said about aspects of our lives that aren't objects. The same can be said about people. Women of my generation were heavily socialized that having a male partner, or even any partner at all, makes you of, quote, higher value in our society. Being married makes a woman higher status, and having children elevates her even more by certain standards. But also, the moment a woman has children, she is expected to manage a job that traditionally villages played, a role that traditionally villages played. We evolved to raise our young communally, not just in isolated little squares sitting on top of the crust of the earth. And mothers face so many challenges in our society. And one of the greatest travesties, in my opinion, is the fact that our society has devalued motherhood to the point that I have friends or I meet women and they're like, oh, I'm just a mom. I'm like, what? Where does just come in? You created other human beings with your body. You brought them into the world. You have kept them alive and you are rearing them. I'm sorry, nothing about that sounds remotely easy. Nothing about that sounds like something that should be even remotely devalued. In fact, that sounds like the status, that the thing that should have the highest reverence in our society. You're creating other members of our species and nurturing them. Isn't that our biological imperative? I opened this episode by saying that I'm not a sage and that I don't have the answers, but I sure have spent a lot of time pointing out things that I disagree with and think are wrong, but disagreeing with the values that our society has taught me to value in many ways doesn't change the fact that I still see myself as being perceived as less than for not having those achievements. So now I would like to read to you from the pages of my journal that's actually really cute. It's got little hedgehogs on it and a watering can. In the hopes that these thoughts I recorded late at night, one night almost a year ago, may help you, dear listener, I share them with you now. I have often seen life as a roadmap, or more accurately, a game board. I scarcely know where I am on the board, but I do know where I am not. I meet people who are elsewhere on the board and immediately feel insecure, as if I'm not playing the game right and they're ahead of me, somehow winning, while I am losing. Or so says a voice in my head that seeks to shame and quiet the part of myself that is confidently me, to the point of illegitimizing many of my adventures, to the point that they often don't come to mind. For I have taught myself not to think of myself as someone who has earned her every gift, turn of luck, talent, and every breath. There is a strong voice in my head that tells me my experiences aren't good enough, that I truly have nothing legitimate to say until I have made it or found some other legitimizing place on the board like motherhood or a 9 to 5 to shield my identity, to distract from any of my shortcomings, which I oft fear are too numerous to count, or failures, or general lack. So I tell myself that my accomplishments and experience isn't good enough, because when it is finally good enough, it will distract me from my weaknesses. I feel weak or less now because I don't have a socially acceptable shield. Who or what am I trying to hide from? And what am I failing to hide? Even in therapy, a voice tells me that I must be like a vacation compared to the rest of her clients. For my problems are so quaint, cozy, and childish compared to everyone else's. Who is this in my head who seeks to diminutize my presence in my own life? Who seeks to muffle my voice and corral the ripples of my own existence? You don't matter. You don't matter. You don't matter. Always and ever, you are a fraud. I must earn my place in all things. Only I never earn it. I am always working toward achieving my place, but never arriving. How would I even know when I arrived? Would I somehow be able to let out a massive sigh and prance confidently on bare feet to my own beat? Does making it mean relaxing into the legitimacy of my own talent and letting that belittling voice fade? Success looks like silencing all the doubts about me in other people's minds that were invented or projected by me in the first place. I judge myself through my perception of another's mind. So why and when did I begin to care what others thought of me and how I measure up? I certainly don't think of other people in such a way. I performed in elementary school seeking my teacher's praise and winning the awards. It was never good enough to just be good at a thing. I always had to be the best, because if you're the best, then you can take that acknowledgement and go back to being your shy, meandering self, often lost in daydreams and in feeling the quiet of the trees amidst the call of the quail. The girl who never wanted to leave her home or her mommy. The girl who was raised outside, then called to come in behind 4 rigid walls for institutionalized learning. That girl had anxiety and tried not to stand out. She was detached, separated from the umbilical of her heart and trying to thrive. More at home among her family, her dogs, her oaks, than her peers. I am still that uncomfortable girl who would rather her friends come to her than she go to them. I'm still finding ways to stay at home, and perhaps I am ensuring it by telling myself that any legitimacy or achievement isn't good enough. or real. Because if it was, then I would have to accept my own potential, take responsibility for my talent, and possibly allow myself to leave, thus breaking an unspoken oath of loyalty to my family. I would have to let the possibilities take me away. Not just literally, but internally. I would have to accept that I am a gifted, worthwhile person who doesn't have anything to prove, and that I have value because I was born. It should be a fairly simple task to view oneself in a positive light. But a switch flips, and blinders go on my mind's eyes to keep me in the same track as ever. Whose disapproval do I fear most? Is it my own? For good or ill, I think quite a bit was revealed in that in that journal entry. And again, I share this not because I particularly enjoyed bearing my psyche, but because I feel like I'm late to the party at having these deep internal conversations with myself. And I don't want you to feel like you're late too. So if somehow hearing that or hearing this episode in general has helped you articulate some of your feelings, then it's worth it to me. It's worth taking the risk to let you into my inner world. That in that entry, at least, is quite full of doubt. I will say that I did write that, as I said, almost a year ago, and it's been on my mind for a very long time. And it's something I continuously engage with, and it has gotten easier, this dance of detangling myself and probably you detangling yourself from the expectations you were raised with, the expectations of society, the markers of success in our society, and finding out what those markers of success and those expectations are of you and by you. What are your values? What do you think makes a good person? What do you want out of your relationships and thus out of your life? Life isn't a game board. There is no winning at life. Life is a beautiful gift. All we have to do is live it. Reading that passage now, I almost broke the fourth wall, or whatever you want to call it when it's a podcast, and said, hey, wait a minute, that's not right, when I said something about having earned the opportunities that I have and luck. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that privilege certainly comes into play with opportunity. And also, I don't think you can earn luck. I'm not sure what I was thinking when I wrote that. But luck certainly plays a huge role in success by every standard of measurement for success. And it's something very few people actually want to acknowledge. So just wanted to not necessarily issue that as a correction, but share that just in case it gave the wrong impression. That's actually where my head is at about those things. So if you have also struggled with feeling less than or not good enough or like a failure in some capacity, I hope this has helped you understand that you're not alone, that a lot of these feelings become internalized from the culture that we live in. They become internalized in the individual, and a lot of our labor as adults is unlearning what we have absorbed from the world around us that doesn't hold true to our internal value system and who we want to be and what kind of life we want to live. If you're not hurting other people or other life forms, then you're probably doing okay. And of course, as I've said before, money is something sadly necessary for survival in this day and age, and many people do not have the luxury to wax poetical and philosophical about it, as I do right now behind the microphone. Many people are so busy just trying to put bread on the table and take care of their families and take care of themselves to get by that they don't have the time to think about these things. And maybe that's where a podcast like this could be helpful, because maybe it will pull you out of that pattern just for a little bit. And once survival needs are taken care of, if they ever truly are in this day and age, maybe you can take a moment to relax and acknowledge when you have enough and think of the life that you want and take whatever steps you need to make sure you're living it, because as Gandalf the Grey once said in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings, when Frodo laments that he wished the ring had never come to him, Gandalf's reply is, "So do all who live to see such times. But that is not for us to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." So, my dear listener, I hope that this has been an enlightening and, dare I say, uplifting episode, hopefully not troubling. And I want to leave you with hope and with some clarity and with some comfort in knowing that there isn't really a wrong way to do life. You're doing just fine. And I so appreciate you gifting me some of your incredibly valuable time. Thank you so much for listening. And if you would like to join our growing community over on Patreon, please check out the link in the show notes. You can join for free, and I post all of the podcast episodes there and encourage discussion. And you can, of course, always find me on social media and increasingly on YouTube. Thank you so much to my paying patrons. You guys mean the world to me. Thank you also to Lane Thomas, the composer of the music you've heard in this episode. I also wanted to encourage you to check out the offering section of my website. I will leave a link below. If you were listening to this episode when it came out or when it comes out, if you're listening to it extemporaneously, I don't know. I'm losing my words. But my Beltane offering is now live, and it is one of my favorite educational offerings. It comes with journaling prompts and traditional recipes, suggestions for how to conduct rituals, and of course, exclusive educational literature written by me. And I don't know, it's just one of my favorite holidays. So it's called Beltane, The Fires Are Lit. It is a self-guided course. Feel free to check it out in the link in the show notes. And if you're not listening to this at the time that Beltane, which is traditionally celebrated on May 1st, is in season, do have a look at my website and check out the offering section to see if there is something in season that entices you. Thank you again so very much for listening. And until next time, may your hearth be warm and your heart be full.